Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at etrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Blue Ox base plate on a 2023 Ford Ranger. Now once your base plate is installed, this is how it's going to look, and overall it's a really clean look because it utilizes the same spot as the factory tow hooks. So that means you're going to get a nice solid mounting point, but also it doesn't have to be too much trimming or anything like that. In fact, this one just kind of bolts in. It's pretty simple, can be done very quickly, and it's kind of nice because it really doesn't require trimming, where some other base plates really do, and you're kind of hacking up the front. So definitely a benefit on this one. Now you'll see that you have your safety chain loops built into it, so that's a nice perfect length, I think, to hook up. They're not too far tucked in, but they're also not sticking out too far, so it makes hooking up easy, but without taking away any of the aesthetic of the vehicle. Now, some other base plates will have a mounting point for a 6-pole. Ours came with a bracket, but we did end up mounting it up here, and the same kind of goes for your breakaway switch, where some other base plates may offer that. And the great part about this style of base plate, you are going to maintain that clean look when just driving around, but whenever you're ready to hook up, you just simply take your arms, put these in place, and after a quick quarter turn, they're going to snap in. So that way you can have this ready to hook up to your tow bar, and whenever you need to release it when you're normally driving, you can just simply pull this, twist it out, and it's back to looking nice and clean. Now when you are ready to hook up to all your flat tail components, it's going to be nice and easy here. Now, being that these are Blue Ox ends, that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have a Blue Ox tow bar. You can generally order a tow bar with a bunch of different style ends, so even if you pick up a Roadmaster, that's not going to be, the end of the world. You can get those adapters and they're going to work with these Blue Ox arms. So we'll just get this slid through. We'll get our safety cables attached. Our breakaway switch as well. Have our diode wiring. Now with everything hooked up, all that's left to do is get our vehicle set up in flat tow mode, and we're ready to hit the road. When it comes to flat towing a vehicle, there's going to be 5 main required components to be able to accomplish that. And the first one, we'll start on the vehicle side, is going to be your base plate. And your base plate attaches to the frame of the vehicle to create a structural mounting point for your tow bar, but also a lot of times your safety chain loops, and sometimes you'll also have spots for the rest of your components. Now, the tow bar will be that connecting point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV, and that's really what's structurally holding it all together. You also have a braking system that's going to allow the vehicle to slow and stop as necessary, and here we have a breakaway cable, so in case of an accidental disconnect, it's going to pull that cable and apply the brakes on the vehicle, and that way it's not rolling down the highway. Going along with a little bit of safety, we have our safety chains, which attach to the base plate and then the hitch on the RV, and that's going to be in case of a catastrophic disconnect. You still have that attachment point. It's going to hold onto the vehicle again, so it's not free rolling down the road. We also have our diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light sequence from the RV to the taillights on the vehicle. Also, your diode wiring is used in a lot of different braking systems as well, but that way you can have your running lights, your turn signals and brake lights happen on the back of the vehicle to let people know what you're doing. Our Ranger is a tremor package, so it's going to be a little bit different if you don't have the tremor, mostly because your shroud is going to go around here. You may have the trim for that, and some of the hardware is a little bit different. The instruction manual does kind of point that out, so follow that along. I've gone ahead and showed you kind of some of those spots that you would remove the shroud. It's going to be very similar, so just refer to the instruction manual if you do not have the tremor. The tremor is going to be a little bit easier just because you mainly remove this skid plate and then you're good to go. We're going to begin our installation here by our tow hooks, and there's this shroud that kind of goes around it. It does kind of clip into it, and it's rubberized up here. So the best way I've found to get these out, just kind of pull up on this section and get this outer shroud out, and then you'll see kind of where it clips in or around the tow hook. It should just kind of slide out. So go ahead and do that on both sides. We're gonna go ahead and get our skid plate taken off. Now there's two 15mm bolts that we're gonna remove on the front, and then on the back side there's gonna be two of them as well. We just need to loosen those up, and that way we can slide it out and remove it. So I'll get these taken out. Now the skid plate is fairly heavy, so just be careful that it's not dropping on you, and we'll set this aside for now. Remove both of our tow hooks. Now we're not going to be reinstalling these, but we are going to be using the hardware, so keep these handy, and it's going to be a 15mm socket to remove them. And go ahead and do that on the other side as well. So now we're gonna grab these brackets, and there are gonna be two different styles. You have this one here with these tapered edges, and this is gonna be for the driver's side. Now the passenger side, they're gonna be squared off at the top edge, and one of these will have a kind of a welded on portion with some threads. We're gonna be using the flat one right now. And we'll be taking our longer bolt. It's got a little bit of a shoulder here, so grab that. We'll put a split washer, a flat washer, feed that through, and then you're gonna do two flat washers here. Now I'm gonna put a little bit of red Loctite on here, and this is gonna make sure long term that this is gonna hold on there once we have it tightened down. And when we get it in place, we're gonna make sure that we're not completely cranking it down. We actually want this loose a little bit so we have some wiggle room. Something else that you're going to want to do, maybe before putting your Loctite on, is take the nut plate that we're going to be feeding in through the frame rail, and sometimes you can get a little bit of weld slag in here and it'll cause it to not want to thread through. So just make sure that it passes through nice and easy, and that way when you're putting it up you're not having to fight against that. So we'll take this, get our Loctite on there, and then on our driver's side here, this is going to go on the outside of the frame rail. And you'll see that there's a hole here. We're going to pass this through. And then our plate here, you can throw some bends on this if you need to, but you should be able to see the bolt through the opening here on the frame rail. We're just going to feed this in, and we're going to kind of get some threads started on here. You can kind of tighten it down, but again, you don't want it completely to where it's not able to move. Main thing is just get a few threads started, and that way this will hold it in place. And we're going to leave this on here for now. So you can see I just hand tighten that down to where those threads kind of, they don't have a whole lot of wiggle here, but I can move it side to side, and that's kind of what we're looking for. So now we'll grab the other driver's side, and we're going to get that one in place. This inside driver bracket, you see you have this welded on portion here. We're going to be using the larger bolts that are found in the kit and a split washer. And I'll go ahead and get some thread lock on here. And then we have our larger weld on nut plate here, and we're going to do the same thing just on the inside of the frame rail. So we'll go ahead and get that to where it's the same way. You can see there's no side to side, but this is still able to move. And this is going to slide up in here. And remember those factory bolts that we took from those factory tow hooks? We're going to be reusing those, but I am going to get a little bit of red Loctite on here, and then we're going to just get this hand tightened in place as well. So just make sure you'll know you have the right one. This bracket should face down, and your safety chain loop will be towards the inside of the vehicle. So just make sure you have it in the proper position. We'll raise this up, and I'm going to get these started in those factory weld nuts there. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kind of start to snug these up. Now it's slotted so it can go side to side. I don't want it tight, but tightening them up just a little to kind of get some of those threads out of the way is going to make it easier for our other hardware to pass up. So just kind of tighten them up a little bit. Again, you do want to still be able to move it side to side so we get that perfect fit. So now we're going to go ahead and attach this center portion to our outside brackets, and we'll be using this bolt. We have plenty of them here in the kit, so find this with a split washer and a flat washer, and then we're going to put some thread locker on here, and then have your nylon lock nut ready to go as well, and we'll just kind of feed this in. This is where kind of snugging that bolt up helps give you a little bit of clearance to be able to get these started. It might be a little tricky here. We'll go ahead, I'm gonna get these all hand tightened on so you can continue and do all 4 total. And before I get the torque wrench on our hardware, I'm gonna snug it up just to save us that rotation that we have. Now, the smaller bolts are gonna be a 9/16. So the one that we fed here in our nut plate, we'll go ahead and get this tightened down. The larger bolt, the 1/2-inch bolt, is going to be a 3/4 inch, so it is pretty tight here. I will point that out. So to get a socket on there is going to be real tricky, so I'm going to be using a ratcheting wrench to get this snug down. I think that's going to be our best option just because it is tight. So we will probably have to use a crow's foot wrench to get this torqued down, but get those 2 tightened down first. And then where your nylon lock nuts were, we're going to be using that 9/16 again, but you're going to want to have a wrench on the that nylon lock nut so you can kind of reach that in there and then get these snug down. So now that we have everything pretty well tightened down, the torque wrench is going to make sure that it's going to be perfectly tight to where it's going to be tight for the lifespan of the base plate, but also not too tight, causing any stress on our hardware and potentially failing. So if you need a torque wrench, we have these available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free. It's going to be that same 9/16, and your torque setting is going to be found in the instruction manual. The 9/16 are all going to be the same torque setting. That 1/2-inch bolt, the larger one that's up here, will be slightly different. So refer to the instruction manual for that. Now, as far as getting these torqued down, I like to try to torque down on the nut side rather than the bolt head, but it's just not going to work here. So you are going to have to get your wrench kind of tucked in here and hold that nut so it's not spinning. And you can go from the back side too if that makes it a little bit easier. And then we'll get these all properly torqued down. And then again, we'll get that 1/2-inch one, and then I'll show you how to get these guys off too. I will say it does get pretty tight here. You could probably take this 10mm off and give you a little bit of access. You can kind of just pry this plastic back and get your torque wrench on this, but it is going to be tight. Now, I did mention that it's going to be really tight on this 1/2-inch one, so it's going to be almost impossible for us to get up there. So I'll be using a crow's foot attachment, and I'll show you how that works. So your crow's foot attachment will just simply slide on the end here, and that's going to give us that little bit of extra space. Now you may have to rotate it a few times once you're on the head of the bolt to get the proper torque setting. So it's pretty important. Really torque that down with that ratcheting wrench before you get to this point. And this should slide on here, and then we'll be able to push and get our torque setting. Now, once you get to a certain point, you may have to take this off and rearrange it to where you have it perfectly set. And do be careful, because this isn't a box end of a wrench, it can slip off. This one's a little bit better. Some of your other styles are open end, and you got to be careful at this high a torque rating. But that's the best way to get to these. Now, these attachments here from our our nut plates, you can cut them off, but honestly, what I've always found to work well is you can grab them and just go side to side. Now, this may take a while, but it will eventually, where they're just tack welded on, that'll pop off, and then these will come out nice and clean. So kind of work these back and forth, up and down, and you'll notice that they'll start to get looser as you get there. And just continue doing that until they pop off. So now we need to attach our safety cable here, and we have our D-link. We have our attachment points back here on those brackets that we mounted up, and the main way that you want to route this is going around the frame. You can see it kind of triangulates over here, so wrap it around there. So that's in case this was to ever fail, all the hardware, this is going to keep that attached. So going around this frame here is ideal, but you want to make sure that you're not going to have any issues with clearances. So make sure it's not going to hit any belts, steering, suspension, anything along those lines. So I'll wrap this around, show you how it looks, and afterwards I might throw some zip ties just to kind of keep it nice and tidy, and that way it's not in the way. And you can choose either side here to mount. I'm gonna go ahead on this inside one. I think it'll keep it a little bit tidier over here. So just loop this through. And then you can go ahead and tighten this down. Now I've gone ahead and just kind of zip tied these up just to kind of keep it tidy, as I mentioned before. And something I'll point out too is our skid plate is going to be mounting back through this hole, so try to keep it up and away from that. It's just going to make getting that hardware in there a little bit easier. So now at this point, you're just going to repeat the exact same steps on the other side. So this is a pretty straightforward install. Now as far as that skid plate, I'm going to hold off until I'm completely done doing the rest of my flat toe components, because a lot of that's going to mount up in this area, and it's really nice to have this somewhat open. There is a plastic panel here, but at least I can get my hands up to be able to route some of the wires. So pretty easy as far as getting it back in. We have those loose bolts, we'll tighten that up. Now this is going to be new hardware, so I'll show you that once we get everything put back on. Now, speaking of mounting up those components, it does come with a bracket that's going to be used for your 6-pole. Now, there's a few different options as far as mounting this up. I see there's a plastic push pin that's kind of tucked here. I might use that as it goes through metal, and then we can get one of these mounted up, and then I'll just simply drill a hole and get that somewhere around this area. With our adaptive cruise control, I'm going to really make sure that I'm not blocking any of that. But really, mounting somewhere in here is going to work, and also you're going to want to mount up your breakaway switch as well. So just a helpful tip if you're doing the rest of your flat toe components. We've gone ahead and got all of our flat toe components mounted up. Everything's complete. So we do need to get our underbody panel here, or our skid plate, back in place. And we're going to be using those same factory bolts on the back. So make sure those are loose, slide this in, and then we're going to grab our hardware that we have in the kit. So we're going to have these bolts. We're going to put a split washer, a flat washer, and then we're going to be finishing it up with a nylon lock nut. Now, this should align with the new tabs that are on your base plate. So I'm going to put a little bit of thread lock in here. And it might get a little bit tricky to get this started, but if you kind of pass this through, here, I'm going to go ahead and kind of reach back here and just kind of get a few threads started. And I'll do that on both sides so it's holding in place. And then to tighten this down, it's going to be a 9/16 socket, and you're going to want to have a 9/16 wrench on that back side, and you just kind of tighten it up from there. But once we have these in place, tighten back down, and our factory bolts are tightened back down, all that's left to do is get our vehicle hooked up with the rest of our flat toe components and hit the road. That was a look and installation of the Blue Ox base plate for a 2023 Ford Ranger.